The Dom Perignon, 1996. Champagne gleamed golden in the Baccarat crystal flute as Adrian Blackthorne observed his collection of sports cars through the study window. Ferrari, Lamborghini, Aston Martin, all lined up like obedient soldiers in the courtyard of his 15-bedroom mansion. At 32, he had built a real estate empire that spanned 3 continents. But this Tuesday morning, something disturbed his impeccable routine. "Mr. Blackthorne," came the hesitant voice of Margaret, his personal secretary for 15 years, through the intercom. "I have bad news about the housekeeper candidates." Adrian sighed, setting the flute on the Italian mahogany desk. In the past 3 months, 17 women had applied for the position. 17 resignations. Some lasted only hours. Others managed to endure 2 weeks before fleeing as if they had seen the devil himself. "Speak," he commanded, adjusting the cuff of his Italian silk shirt. "Mrs. Richardson called this morning. She said that, she said she'd rather clean public restrooms than come back here." A sardonic smile curved Adrian's lips. "At least she was creative. What about the others on the list?" "They all declined after researching your name online, sir." "Ah, the reputation." Adrian Blackthorne wasn't just known for his wealth. He was famous for his cutting coldness, his summary dismissals, and his absolute intolerance for imperfection. The press had nicknamed him the Tyrant of Manhattan, and he secretly took pride in the title. "There's one more thing, sir," Margaret continued cautiously. "A woman called this morning. She said she saw the ad in the newspaper and would like an interview." Adrian arched an eyebrow. "She didn't research me? From what I understood, she doesn't have internet at home, sir." For the first time in weeks, Adrian felt a spark of interest. Name? Serafina Winters. On the other side of Manhattan, Serafina Winters carefully folded the copy of the New York Times she had found on the subway. The ad was circled in red. "Housekeeper for Upper East Side Mansion. Exceptional salary for the right person. References required. $8,000 a month." It was more than she earned in 6 months working as a cleaner in 3 different jobs. With that money, she could finally pay for her grandmother Eleanor's medical bills, the only family she had left after her parents died in a car accident when she was 16. Serafina looked around the small 1-bedroom apartment she shared with her grandmother. The peeling walls, the heater that only worked sporadically, the refrigerator that made more noise than a truck engine, all of this could be history in a few months if she got this job. "Sarah, dear," Eleanor's fragile voice came from the bedroom. "Are you talking to yourself again?" "No, Grandma," Serafina replied, tucking the newspaper into her worn purse. "Just thinking out loud." At 25, Serafina had learned that life rarely offered second chances. But maybe, just maybe, this was hers. At 3 o'clock sharp, Serafina stopped before the wrought iron gates of the Blackthorne mansion. Her first reaction was to swallow hard. The property extended for more than 2 blocks, with gardens that looked like they came from an architecture magazine. The mansion itself was a Georgian-style masterpiece, with its 5 floors of limestone and windows that gleamed like diamonds in the afternoon sun. "You must be Mrs. Winters," said an elegant middle-aged woman who awaited her at the main entrance. "I'm Margaret Collins, Mr. Blackthorne's personal assistant." Serafina smoothed her simple black dress, the only one she owned that could pass for formal. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for receiving me." Margaret guided her through corridors adorned with artwork that Serafina was sure she had seen in museums. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like constellations frozen in time, and the marble beneath her feet was so polished it perfectly reflected her image. "Some basic rules," Margaret murmured as they walked. "Mr. Blackthorne values punctuality, efficiency, and above all, discretion. He doesn't tolerate incompetence or—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Excessive familiarity." They stopped before a double oak door. Margaret knocked twice. "Enter," came the masculine voice from within. Serafina took a deep breath and followed Margaret into the office. And then she saw him. Adrian Blackthorne stood behind a desk that seemed the size of a small car, leafing through some documents. He was tall, must have been over 6 feet, with perfectly cut dark hair and shoulders that filled his tailored suit, as if he had been born wearing Armani. When he looked up, Serafina encountered the coldest blue she had ever seen. They were the eyes of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Mrs. Winters," he said, without any warmth in his voice. He didn't offer his hand or smile. He simply evaluated her as if she were an object he was considering buying. "Sit." Serafina settled into the leather chair in front of the desk, struggling to maintain her posture under his scrutiny. "Tell me about your experience," Adrian commanded, crossing his arms. "I've been working in cleaning for 9 years, Serafina began, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've worked in offices, private homes, and—" "References," he interrupted her. Serafina handed over a simple folder with 3 recommendation letters. Adrian examined them quickly, his eyes scanning the paper with the speed of someone accustomed to processing information in seconds. "Mrs. Patterson speaks well of your work," he commented, without looking up. "But this house isn't a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, Mrs. Winters. This property has 15 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, 2 offices, a library, movie theater, gym, and a kitchen that serves events for up to 50 people. Serafina felt her heart race. "I learned quickly, Mr. Blackthorne, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Finally, he looked up at her. There was a moment of silence where she felt he was trying to decipher something about her. "Why do you want this job?" he asked, his voice dropping a tone. The question caught her off guard. Serafina could lie, create a story about loving domestic work, or having a passion for historic houses. But something in the way he observed her, as if he could see through any facade, made her choose the truth. "I need the money," she said simply. "My grandmother is sick, and I need to pay for treatments." Adrian blinked slowly. For the first time since entering the office, his expression wavered slightly. "Are you aware that the last 17 women who held this position quit?" "No, sir, but I imagine they had their reasons." "And you believe you'll be different?" Serafina met his eyes and held his gaze. "I need to be different." The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made Serafina feel completely exposed. "Very well, Mrs. Winters," he said finally. "1-week trial. If you can last 7 days without giving me reason to fire you, I'll consider keeping you permanently." Serafina's heart jumped. "Thank you, Mr. Blackthorne. I won't disappoint you." "We'll see." He stood up, indicating the interview was over. "Margaret will instruct you about your responsibilities. You start tomorrow at 6 in the morning." Serafina stood as well, fighting the urge to smile openly. "I'll be here." "One last thing," Adrian said when she reached the door. His voice had that cutting quality again. "I don't tolerate incompetence, gossip, or any form of intrusion into my privacy. This house has rules. Follow them, and we won't have problems." "Understood, sir." When the door closed behind her, Serafina finally allowed the smile to take over her face. Margaret was guiding her back through the corridor, explaining schedules and responsibilities, but Serafina could barely concentrate. She had done it. She had really done it. Of course, Adrian Blackthorne seemed exactly the type of man the press described: cold, arrogant, and probably impossible to please. But she had faced worse things. Much worse. What Serafina didn't know as she walked through the perfectly manicured gardens toward the street was that Adrian was still standing by his office window, watching her departure with an expression he couldn't decipher. And what neither of them knew was that in 1 week, everything in their orderly, organized lives would be turned upside down. Because sometimes, when we least expect it, destiny decides to play a trick that will change everything forever. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 6 times as Serafina pushed through the mansion's servant entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd barely slept, alternating between excitement and terror about what awaited her in this palace of marble and mysteries. Margaret appeared immediately, clipboard in hand, and expression unreadable. "Mrs. Winters, punctual. Good." She handed over a detailed schedule. "Mr. Blackthorne takes his coffee at precisely 6:30 a.m. in the morning room. Black, no sugar. Temperature between 160 and 165 degrees. He reads 3 newspapers simultaneously and despises any interruption." Serafina scanned the list. It was longer than her grocery receipt for an entire month. "And if I get the temperature wrong?" The last housekeeper was dismissed for serving it at 155 degrees. Margaret's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "Follow me." The kitchen was a cathedral of stainless steel and granite, equipped with appliances that probably cost more than Serafina's yearly rent. She prepared the coffee with surgical precision, checking the thermometer twice before pouring it into what appeared to be hand-painted Chinese porcelain. "Steady hands," she whispered to herself. balancing the tray as Margaret led her through corridors lined with oil paintings worth small fortunes. The morning room was awash in golden sunlight, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. Adrian sat at a mahogany table, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. 3 newspapers were spread before him like battle plans. "Coffee, Mr. Blackthorne," Serafina said softly, setting the cup beside his right elbow as Margaret had instructed. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her existence, simply lifted the cup, took a sip, and continued reading. Serafina waited. Was she supposed to leave? Stay? Curtsy? After an eternal minute, he spoke without raising his eyes. "The Financial Times is upside down." Panic shot through her. She'd arranged the papers exactly as Margaret showed her. "But I'm sorry, sir. I'll leave it." His voice was ice. "Just remember for tomorrow." As she turned to go, something made her pause. A photograph on the side table caught her eye. A young boy with Adrian's unmistakable blue eyes, laughing as he rode piggyback on a man's shoulders. Both were covered in mud, grinning at the camera with pure joy. "Mrs. Winters," Adrian's voice was sharp now. "Was there something else?" "No, sir." "Sorry." She fled, cheeks burning. But she'd seen something in his face when she looked at that photograph. A flicker of pain? The rest of the morning passed in a whirlwind of polishing, organizing, and memorizing Adrian's impossibly specific preferences. The books in his library were arranged by publication date, then alphabetically by author. His shirts were organized by color gradient. Even his pens had assigned positions on his desk. "He's very particular," Margaret explained as they cleaned the third-floor bedrooms. "But not unreasonable. Follow the rules and he'll barely notice you exist." "Has he always been like this?" Serafina asked, carefully dusting a crystal figurine. Margaret's hand stilled on the silver frame she was polishing. "He wasn't always," she chose her words carefully, "so controlled." Before Serafina could ask more, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Adrian appeared in the doorway, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Margaret, I need the Morrison contracts." His gaze flicked to Serafina, who immediately felt like she was under a microscope. "Mrs. Winters, this room's windows are streaked." Serafina looked at the windows she'd spent 20 minutes perfecting. They looked flawless to her, but she nodded. "I'll redo them, sir." "See that you do." He started to leave, then paused. "And next time, use the proper cleaning solution. Not whatever discount product you're accustomed to." The words stung like a slap. Serafina felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her voice level. "Of course, Mr. Blackthorne." After he left, Margaret sighed. "Don't take it personally. He's testing you. By humiliating me? By seeing if you'll fight back or fold." Margaret gave her a meaningful look. "The ones who fold don't last." That afternoon, Serafina was organizing Adrian's study when she discovered something that made her heart stop. Hidden behind a row of financial reports was a small wooden box, slightly ajar. Inside were children's drawings, stick figures labeled "Me and Daddy," a crayon house with "Home Sweet Home" written in shaky letters, and a photo of Adrian kneeling beside a hospital bed where a pale little boy lay sleeping. "What are you doing?" She spun around, nearly dropping the box. Adrian stood in the doorway, his face a mask of fury that made her blood freeze. "I was just organizing the shelves, and this fell." "Put it back. Now." His voice was deadly quiet. With trembling hands, Serafina replaced the box. Adrian strode over, checking that everything was exactly as it had been, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. "Let me make something crystal clear, Mrs. Winters." He turned to face her, and she saw something raw and dangerous in his eyes. "You are here to clean, not to snoop through my personal belongings. Touch anything that doesn't concern your duties again, and you're out. Understood?" "Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "I don't care what you meant." He moved closer, and she caught a hint of his cologne, expensive and masculine. "Everyone who enters this house thinks they have the right to my story, to understand what makes me tick. They don't. Neither do you." The pain in his voice was so acute it took her breath away. This wasn't just anger. It was agony, carefully controlled and fiercely guarded. "I understand," she whispered. For a moment they stood frozen, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, close enough to count his heartbeats. Something electric crackled between them. Recognition, attraction, danger. Then Adrian stepped back as if she'd burned him. "See that you do," he said coldly, and walked out. Serafina sank into the leather chair, her hands shaking. She'd almost lost the job, but more than that, she glimpsed the man behind the monster, and what she'd seen made her heart ache in ways she couldn't explain. Outside, a storm was brewing. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rumbled like a warning. Neither of them realized that everything had just changed, that the careful walls Adrian had built around his heart had developed their first crack, and that Serafina Winters was about to become the most dangerous thing that had ever entered his perfectly controlled world. The storm hit Manhattan like a vengeful god at 8 p.m., turning the world outside into a symphony of chaos. Rain lashed against the mansion's windows with violent intensity, while lightning illuminated the sky in electric bursts. Serafina should have left hours ago, but she'd stayed to finish organizing the library, partly from dedication, partly to avoid Adrian after their confrontation. She was shelving the last of the rare first editions when the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. "Perfect," she muttered, fumbling for her phone's flashlight in the suffocating darkness. A crash of thunder shook the entire mansion, followed by what sounded like breaking glass somewhere deep in the house. Then, cutting through the storm's roar, came a sound that made her blood freeze. A man's voice, raw with anguish, shouting, "No, Daniel, no!" Adrian. Without thinking, Serafina ran toward the sound, her phone's weak light bouncing off the walls as she navigated the maze of corridors. She found him in his study, thrashing on the leather sofa where he must have fallen asleep. Even in the dim light, she could see the sweat beading his forehead, the way his hands clenched and unclenched as he fought invisible demons. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I should have been there. Should have." His voice broke on a sob that tore through her chest like a blade. A nightmare. He was trapped in a nightmare, and she couldn't just stand there and watch him suffer. "Mr. Blackthorne," she said softly, approaching carefully. "You're dreaming. You need to wake up." He didn't respond, lost in whatever hell his subconscious had dragged him into. His whole body was tense, every muscle coiled with pain. Serafina made a decision that would change everything. She knelt beside the sofa and gently touched his shoulder. "Adrian, it's okay. You're safe. You're home." The moment her skin made contact with his, he jerked awake with a gasp that sounded like a drowning man finding air. In the pale glow of her phone, his eyes were wild, disoriented, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. "Serafina?" Her name on his lips was a question, a prayer, a plea. "I'm here. You were having a nightmare." For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, they stared at each other in the darkness. She was acutely aware of everything, the warmth of his skin under her palm, the way his chest rose and fell rapidly, the faint scent of his cologne mixed with something indefinably masculine. His hair was mussed, his shirt wrinkled, and for the first time since she'd met him, Adrian Blackthorne looked completely, utterly human. "The power's out," she said unnecessarily, trying to fill the charged silence. "I noticed." His voice was hoarse, still thick with sleep and pain. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "What time is it?" "Just after 8. The storm hit pretty hard. I don't think it's safe to drive home yet." As if summoned by her words, another crash of thunder shook the house, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the roof. They both looked up instinctively. "Sounds like a tree branch," Adrian muttered. He seemed to be regaining his composure, but she could still see the tremor in his hands. "Margaret left hours ago. I thought you had too. I stayed to finish the library." She hesitated, then took a risk. "Are you all right?" The question hung between them like a live wire. In the business world, Adrian Blackthorne was untouchable, unbreakable, but here, in the darkness, with the walls stripped away by sleep and vulnerability, he looked like a man carrying the weight of unbearable loss. "I'm fine," he said automatically, but the lie was transparent. "No, you're not." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "And that's okay. You don't have to be fine all the time." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know what grief looks like." Her voice was soft but steady. "I know what it sounds like when someone's heart is breaking, even in their sleep. Don't." The word was sharp, a warning, but underneath it, she heard desperation. Lightning illuminated the room in a brilliant flash, and for that split second she saw him clearly, Not the ruthless businessman or the impossible employer, but a man drowning in sorrow he'd never allowed himself to process. "Daniel," she said gently, "that's who you were dreaming about, isn't it?" The name hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, his jaw clenching so hard she could see the muscle jump in his cheek. "Stop. He was your son. I said stop." Adrian surged to his feet, towering over her in the darkness. But instead of intimidating her, his size only made him seem more lost, more desperate. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to dig into my life and dissect my pain for your entertainment." Serafina rose slowly, holding her ground. "I'm not entertained, Adrian. I'm heartbroken for you." The use of his first name seemed to stun them both. It hung in the air between them, intimate and forbidden. "You think you understand?" His voice was deadly quiet. "You think you can waltz in here with your compassion and your wide eyes and fix whatever's broken in me? I think you're suffering." She stepped closer, drawn by something stronger than fear. "And I think you've been suffering alone for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to let someone care. Caring is a luxury I can't afford." But his voice lacked conviction now. Another lightning flash, and she saw tears he was fighting not to shed. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his cheek. "Everyone deserves to be cared for," she whispered. For a moment, he leaned into her touch. Just for a moment, his walls crumbled completely, and she saw the man he used to be, before loss carved him hollow, before pain taught him that caring meant destruction. Then thunder crashed directly overhead, and he jerked away as if her touch burned. "This is exactly why you can't stay here," he said, his voice rough with emotion he was fighting to control. "This is why they all leave eventually. Because you push them away? Because I destroy everything I touch." The raw honesty in his voice broke her heart. Before she could respond, the lights flickered back to life, harsh and sudden, after the intimate darkness. Adrian straightened immediately, smoothing his hair, adjusting his shirt, rebuilding his armor piece by piece. "The power's back," he said unnecessarily, his voice already returning to its usual controlled tone. "You should go home." But something fundamental had shifted between them in those moments of darkness and vulnerability. They both felt it, dangerous and electric, as the storm still raging outside. 3 days after the storm, Adrian had perfected the art of avoiding Serafina Winters. He left for the office before dawn, returned after midnight, and communicated only through terse notes left on his desk. Coffee too weak. Try again. Library books out of order. Windows still streaked. Each criticism was designed to wound, to push her away before she could get closer to the truth he'd exposed in that moment of darkness. But every morning she was there, punctual, determined, unbreakable. It was driving him slowly insane. "Sir?" Margaret's voice cut through his brooding as he stared out his office window at the Manhattan skyline. "The quarterly reports. What about them?" "You've been staring at the same page for 20 minutes. Adrian set down the papers, frustrated. Even at work, he couldn't escape thoughts of soft hands on his face and eyes that saw too much. "How is she?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Margaret didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Stubborn. Professional. She redid the library organization 3 times yesterday until it met your specifications. And she hasn't complained once about your feedback. Your cruelty, she meant." Adrian heard it in the careful way she chose her words. Maybe she's finally learning her place. Margaret gave him a look that could have frozen hell. Or maybe she's the first person in 3 years who isn't afraid of you. The words hit their mark. Adrian turned back to the window, jaw tight. "Send her home early today. I don't want her there when I return." "Adrian." "That's an order, Margaret." But when he arrived at the mansion that evening, Serafina was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared what looked like a feast. "I told Margaret to send you home," he said from the doorway, his voice colder than winter. She looked up, unfazed. "She did. I chose to stay." She gestured to the stove. "You haven't been eating. The staff mentioned you've been skipping meals. That's none of your concern, isn't it?" She turned to face him fully, and he was struck again by how beautiful she was when defiant. "You're my employer. If you collapse from exhaustion or malnutrition, I lose my job." It was a reasonable excuse, but they both knew it was a lie. She cared, despite his best efforts to kill that caring with cruelty. "I don't need a nursemaid, Mrs. Winters." "Good, because I'm a housekeeper." She turned back to the stove. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. The dining room is already set. I eat in my study. Not tonight. The quiet authority in her voice made him pause. No one gave Adrian Blackthorne orders in his own home. He should fire her on the spot. Instead, he found himself asking, "What did you make?" A small smile played at her lips. "Your favorite, according to the cook you had before Margaret took over meal planning." "How could you possibly know?" I asked her. Serafina's eyes met his directly. "Margaret gave me her number. She said you used to love her osso buco, but you fired her after—" She paused delicately. "After Daniel died." He finished the sentence she was too kind to complete. "She kept trying to feed me, said I needed to keep my strength up. I couldn't stand the sight of food. And now?" He looked at the kitchen, really looked at it. She'd somehow made the sterile space warm and inviting. Soft music played from her phone. Candles flickered on the counter, and the smell of slow-braised beef filled the air with comfort he hadn't felt in years. "Now I'm wondering why you care so much about feeding a man who's been nothing but cruel to you." Serafina wiped her hands on a dish towel, considering her words. "My grandmother used to say that food is love made visible. When someone's hurting, sometimes a good meal is the only comfort they'll accept. I'm not hurting." She gave him a look that called him a liar, without saying a word. "Fine." He loosened his tie with sharp movements. 10 minutes, but don't expect gratitude or conversation. The dining room felt different with 2 place settings instead of his usual solitary meal. Serafina served the ossobuco with a practiced grace that spoke of years caring for others, and despite his determination to remain cold, Adrian found himself tasting food properly for the first time in months. It was perfect, rich, complex, exactly as he remembered from better times. "The Milanese saffron," he said after several bites. "Where did you find it?" "There's a little spice shop in Little Italy. The owner imports it directly." She took a small bite, watching his reaction. "Is it right?" "It's—" He paused, something dangerous softening in his chest. "It's exactly right." They ate in relative silence, but it wasn't the harsh quiet he'd grown accustomed to. This was comfortable, warm, the kind of shared space he'd forgotten existed. "Tell me about Daniel," Serafina said softly when they'd nearly finished. The fork froze halfway to his mouth. "No. He was beautiful. In the photograph." I said no. "He had your eyes." "Stop." The word was sharp enough to cut. "But your wife's smile." "I don't have a wife." The words exploded from him with volcanic force. He slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. "She left. The moment things got difficult, Rachel packed her bags and walked away. Said she couldn't handle watching our son die, couldn't handle my grief on top of her own. So don't you dare romanticize what we had." The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian immediately regretted the outburst, the raw pain he'd exposed. But Serafina didn't flinch, didn't retreat. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "That must have been unbearable, losing Daniel and having her abandon you when you needed her most." The gentleness in her voice almost broke him. "You don't understand. I drove her away. My anger, my inability to. I destroyed my marriage the same way I destroy everything else. Or maybe she wasn't strong enough to love you through the worst thing that could happen to parents." Her words hit him like a physical blow. No one had ever suggested that Rachel's leaving wasn't his fault. Everyone, therapists, well-meaning friends, his own mind, had convinced him he was toxic, that loving him was dangerous. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know that grief makes people do terrible things to the ones they love," she said quietly. "I know because I did it too. When my parents died, I pushed everyone away. I was angry at the world, angry at God, angry at them for leaving me. I nearly lost my grandmother because I was so determined to hurt alone." Adrian found himself leaning forward, despite his resolve to remain distant. "What changed?" "She got sick, really sick. And suddenly I realized that pushing people away doesn't protect you from loss. It just guarantees you'll face it alone." Serafina's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Your Daniel wouldn't want that for you." The mention of his son's name should have sent him into a rage. Instead, it cracked something open in his chest that he'd kept locked away for 3 years. "He was 6, Adrian whispered. "Leukemia, 18 months of treatments, of hope, of watching him fight so hard." His voice broke. "He was braver than I'll ever be." Serafina reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. This time, He didn't pull away. "Tell me about him," she said softly. "Tell me who he was when he wasn't sick." And for the first time since Daniel died, Adrian did. For the first time in 3 years, Adrian Blackthorne talked about his son without feeling like he was drowning. Serafina listened with the kind of attention that made memories feel safe, her hand still covering his as he painted pictures with words. "Daniel had this laugh," he said, staring at their joined hands. "Infectious, you know. He could find joy in the smallest things. A butterfly in the garden, chocolate chip pancakes, the way rain sounded on his bedroom window." His voice grew softer. "Even during chemo, even when he was so weak he could barely lift his head, he'd still laugh at my terrible jokes." "He sounds like he was pure sunshine," Serafina whispered. "He was, and I failed him." "How could you possibly have failed him?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "I couldn't save him. With all my money, all my connections, the best doctors in the world, none of it mattered. I'm used to controlling everything, fixing everything, and I couldn't fix the one thing that actually mattered." "Adrian," she squeezed his hand, "you gave him love. You were there. That's not failure. That's everything." Before he could respond, the doorbell chimed through the house like an alarm. They both froze. The intimate bubble they'd created suddenly pierced. "Are you expecting someone?" Serafina asked. "No." Adrian frowned, pulling his hand away and immediately missing her warmth. "Margaret handles my calendar." The bell rang again, more insistently. Adrian rose with obvious reluctance. "I should answer that." But when he opened the front door, his expression shifted from annoyance to something much darker. "Rachel." Serafina, clearing the dinner dishes in the dining room, heard a woman's voice, cultured, confident, with just a hint of practiced vulnerability. "Hello, Adrian. You look well. What do you want? That's not very welcoming." "May I come in? It's rather cold out here." Serafina found herself frozen in the doorway between the dining room and foyer, witnessing a collision between Adrian's past and present. The woman who entered was stunning in that effortless way that spoke of excellent genetics and expensive maintenance. Blonde, elegant, wearing a coat that probably cost more than most people's cars. This had to be Rachel, Daniel's mother, Adrian's ex-wife. "I was in the neighborhood," Rachel said, her eyes already cataloging changes in the house. "I thought perhaps we could talk. We have nothing to discuss, don't we?" Rachel's gaze found Serafina, and something sharp flickered in her blue eyes. "I see you've moved on." The implication hit Adrian like a slap. "Mrs. Winters is my housekeeper. How modern of you." Rachel's smile was poison wrapped in silk. "Dining with the help now? How egalitarian." Serafina felt heat flood her cheeks, but before she could retreat, Adrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Careful, Rachel. Your breeding is showing." "Is it?" Rachel moved closer to Adrian, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper that still carried perfectly across the marble foyer. "I've missed you, you know. Missed us. There is no us. You made that clear when you walked out." "I was grieving, Adrian. People do stupid things when they're in pain." Her perfectly manicured hand touched his arm. "But I've had time to think, time to realize what I threw away. We could try again. We could have another child." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. Serafina saw him flinch, saw the color drain from his face. "Get out! Adrian, please, just listen." "I said get out." His voice echoed off the walls, raw with fury and pain. "You don't get to waltz back in here and talk about replacing him like he was a broken toy." "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is. It's exactly what you meant. Just like you meant it when you said you couldn't handle this anymore. Just like you meant it when you packed your bags while our son was dying in the hospital, because watching him suffer was too hard for your delicate sensibilities." Rachel's composure cracked slightly. "You were impossible to live with. Your anger, your obsession with finding a cure that didn't exist. I was trying to save our child. You were trying to play God. And when you couldn't, you took it out on everyone around you, including me." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Serafina watched Adrian absorb the blow, watched his shoulders sag slightly under the weight of old guilt. "You're right," he said quietly, and Rachel's eyes lit with triumph. "I was impossible. I was angry and obsessed and probably unbearable to live with. But I never stopped fighting for him. I never gave up. And I sure as hell never abandoned the person who was supposed to love me enough to fight beside me. Adrian. No, You made your choice, Rachel. You chose yourself over our family when things got hard. And now you want to come back because what? You're lonely? Bored? Having second thoughts about the hedge fund manager you married 6 months after our divorce was final? Rachel's face flushed. How did you— I may have been grieving, but I wasn't blind. Now get out of my house. This was our house too, Adrian. Our home. Our home died with Daniel. This is just where I live now. The finality in his voice seemed to reach Rachel. She looked around the foyer one more time, her gaze lingering on Serafina with undisguised hostility. When you get tired of playing house with the help, she said, venom dripping from every word, call me. I'll be waiting. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian stood frozen in the foyer, staring at the closed door, as if it might open again to reveal this had all been a nightmare. Adrian? Serafina approached carefully, the way she might approach a wounded animal. Don't. His voice was hollow. Just don't. But she ignored the warning, moving closer until she was standing directly in front of him. She's wrong, you know, about everything. Is she? He looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. Because it feels like she's right. It feels like I destroy everything I touch, everyone I love. You didn't destroy Daniel. You loved him. You fought for him. And you? The question was barely a whisper. What happens when you realize that caring about me is dangerous? That I'm exactly the kind of man who drives away everyone who matters? The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in Serafina's chest. Without thinking, she reached up and framed his face with both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I'm not her, Adrian. I'm not going to run when things get complicated or painful or messy. That's not who I am. You say that now. I say that because I mean it. She moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I've seen you at your worst, angry, cruel, trying to push me away. And I'm still here. I'm still choosing to be here. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, hope, fear all tangled together. Serafina, he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. The space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility, dangerous and electric and completely inevitable. Time suspended between them like a held breath. Serafina's hands framed Adrian's face while he stared at her with an expression that bordered on worship and terror. The space between their lips measured in heartbeats, in possibility, in the dangerous territory of no return. This is insane, he whispered. But his hands found her waist, pulling her closer despite his words. Probably, she agreed, her thumb tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. Does that matter? His answer came not in words, but in the way he closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers with desperate hunger. The kiss was everything their careful politeness had hidden. Raw, consuming, 3 weeks of tension exploding into need that made them both tremble. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I can't offer you anything good, he said raggedly. I'm broken, Serafina. Damaged beyond repair. So am I. Her hand slipped to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Maybe that's why we recognize each other. He kissed her again, softer this time, with a reverence that made her eyes flutter closed. But when his phone buzzed insistently from his pocket, reality crashed back like cold water. Ignore it, Serafina whispered against his lips. The buzzing stopped, then started again immediately. Adrian cursed under his breath and pulled out the device. His expression darkened as he read the screen. What is it? Margaret. Emergency at the Singapore project. He looked at her with genuine regret. I have to take this call. The time difference means— I understand. She stepped back, smoothing her hair with shaking hands. Business comes first. Serafina. That's not— But his phone was already ringing again. With a frustrated growl, he answered. Margaret, this better be life or death. As Adrian paced into his study, speaking in sharp, controlled sentences about contracts and deadlines, Serafina stood alone in the foyer where everything had changed. She touched her lips, still tingling from his kiss, and tried to process what had just happened. She'd kissed Adrian Blackthorne. More than that, she'd fallen for him completely, utterly, despite every rational thought screaming warnings. 20 minutes later, Adrian emerged from his study looking like a storm cloud. I have to fly to Singapore tonight, he said without preamble. There's been a complication with the Morrison deal. Millions at stake if I don't handle it personally. The abrupt shift from intimacy to business felt like whiplash. Of course, I should go home anyway. No. The word came out sharper than intended. He softened his tone. I mean, you don't have to leave. Stay, please. We need to. When I get back, we need to talk about what just happened. Do we? She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. Maybe it was just a moment of weakness after seeing Rachel. Maybe it didn't mean anything. Adrian crossed to her in 3 quick strides, catching her hands in his. It meant everything. That's what terrifies me. Before she could respond, Margaret appeared in the doorway like a guardian angel of terrible timing. The car's here, sir. Your bag is packed, and the jet is fueled. Adrian's jaw tightened with frustration. 5 minutes. After Margaret disappeared, he turned back to Serafina with an expression of such raw longing it took her breath away. When you come back, we'll pretend this never happened, she interrupted, forcing strength into her voice she didn't feel. You'll remember all the reasons why this is impossible, and I'll remember that I'm just the help. Don't you dare. His hands tightened on hers. Don't let Rachel's poison into your head. What's between us has nothing to do with money or social status or any of that bullshit. Doesn't it? The pain she'd been holding back crept into her voice. You're Adrian Blackthorne. I clean houses for a living. This is a fairy tale, and fairy tales don't exist in the real world. Then maybe it's time we rewrote the rules. The words hung between them, dangerous and full of promise. But before either could say more, Margaret reappeared with barely concealed impatience. Sir, the flight plan. I'm coming. Adrian lifted Serafina's hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Don't disappear on me while I'm gone. Promise me. The vulnerability in his request broke her heart. I promise. But as she watched his car disappear into the Manhattan traffic, Serafina wondered if promises made in moments of passion ever survived the cold light of reality. 3 days without Adrian felt like 3 years. The mansion echoed with emptiness, and Serafina found herself cleaning rooms that were already spotless, just to keep busy. She reorganized his study twice, polished every surface until it gleamed, and tried not to think about how his lips had felt against hers. It was impossible. Every room held memories now. The library where he'd caught her with Daniel's pictures, the kitchen where she'd cooked for him, the foyer where everything had changed. She was losing herself in dreams of a future that could never exist when Margaret found her staring out the morning room window. He called, Margaret said, without preamble. Serafina's heart jumped. When? What did he say? Asked if you were still here. Asked if you seemed upset. What did you tell him? Margaret studied her with eyes that missed nothing. I told him you were professional as always. But between you and me, dear, you look like a woman falling in love with the wrong man. The words hit like a physical blow. It's not like that. Isn't it? Margaret sat beside her, something almost maternal in her expression. I've worked for Adrian for 15 years. I've seen him with many women. Socialites, models, business associates. None of them ever got past his walls. None of them ever saw the man behind the armor. Margaret, but you have. And that terrifies him more than any business deal or financial loss ever could. Serafina's throat tightened. Then why does it feel like I'm setting myself up for heartbreak? Because love always feels like that at the beginning. The question is whether you think he's worth the risk. Before Serafina could answer, the front door chimed with a delivery. Margaret rose to answer it, returning moments later with an enormous bouquet of white roses and a small wrapped box. For you? She said, unable to hide her smile. With trembling fingers, Serafina opened the card. For the woman who makes me remember what hope feels like. A. Inside the box was a delicate silver necklace with a small star pendant. No diamonds, no ostentation, just simple, elegant beauty that spoke of a man who'd paid attention to her style, her preferences, her heart. He's never sent flowers to the house before, Margaret said softly. Not even for Rachel. Serafina clutched the necklace to her chest, feeling something dangerous bloom in her heart. Maybe fairy tales could exist in the real world. Maybe some risks were worth taking. But as she fastened the necklace around her throat, neither she nor Margaret noticed the sleek black car parked across the street, or the woman inside it taking photographs with a telephoto lens. Rachel Blackthorne had always believed in destroying what she couldn't have. Adrian's jet touched down at JFK at 11 p.m. on Friday, 3 days that felt like an eternity since he'd kissed Serafina Winters and discovered what it meant to want something more than success or revenge. The Singapore deal was closed, worth $50 million in profit, but all he could think about was getting home to the woman who'd made him remember what it felt like to be alive. He'd bought her gift in a moment of vulnerability at the Singapore airport, a delicate star necklace that reminded him of the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed. It was a risk, crossing the line from employer to… what? He wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't pretend anymore that what he felt was merely attraction. The mansion was dark when his driver pulled up, but Adrian noticed a light still on in the kitchen. His heart accelerated as he imagined finding Serafina there, maybe making late-night tea, maybe wearing the necklace he'd sent. Instead, he found Margaret at the kitchen island, her laptop open, her expression grim. "You're back early," she said without looking up. "Finished ahead of schedule." He loosened his tie, suddenly wary of her tone. "Where's Serafina?" "Gone." The single word hit him like a physical blow. "What do you mean, gone?" Margaret turned the laptop toward him, and Adrian felt the world tilt sideways. On the screen was the front page of Manhattan Elite, the city's most vicious gossip blog. The headline read, "Blackthorne's Housekeeping, Billionaire's Sordid Affair with His Maid." Below it were photographs. Serafina entering the mansion, Serafina in the garden wearing the star necklace, and worst of all, a grainy but unmistakable image of Adrian kissing her in the foyer the night Rachel had visited. "When did this go live?" His voice was deadly quiet. 4 hours ago. It's already been picked up by 6 other sites and 2 tabloids. Adrian's hands clenched into fists as he read the article. Every word was poison, designed to humiliate and destroy. It painted Serafina as a gold-digging opportunist who seduced her wealthy employer, complete with fabricated quotes from anonymous sources about their torrid affair and inappropriate relationship. "The star necklace," he said, recognizing it in one of the photos. "She was wearing it when these were taken?" "Yes. Which means whoever took them has been watching the house since you sent it." Adrian's blood turned to ice. "Rachel, that would be my guess." The article mentions your recent reunion with your ex-wife and speculates about Serafina being desperate to eliminate the competition. The sheer calculated cruelty of it took his breath away. Rachel hadn't just attacked him. She'd systematically destroyed an innocent woman's reputation for the crime of caring about her ex-husband. "Where is Serafina now?" Margaret's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "She came to work this morning as usual. Didn't seem to know about the article until Mrs. Patterson called from her old job saying she'd seen it online. And then she packed her things and left. Said she couldn't stay and make things worse for you." Adrian felt something crack open in his chest, rage so pure and consuming it made his vision blur. "She left to protect me. She loves you, Adrian. Even I can see that. But she's also a smart woman who knows this kind of scandal could destroy her life." He was already reaching for his phone. "I have to find her. I have to fix this. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. I tried calling her apartment. No answer. Then I'll go there." "Adrian." Margaret's voice stopped him at the kitchen door. "What if she doesn't want to be found? What if she's decided you're not worth the price she'd have to pay?" The question hit him like a knife to the heart. Because the terrible truth was, Serafina would pay a price for loving him. Every job she applied for, every relationship she tried to build, this scandal would follow her. Rachel had made sure of that. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving that she's wrong," he said quietly. Serafina sat on the narrow fire escape outside her grandmother's apartment, staring at the city lights through tears she was too tired to wipe away. The small suitcase containing her few possessions sat beside her, everything she could grab before fleeing the mansion in shame. Her phone had been buzzing for hours with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters, probably, wanting quotes for follow-up stories. She'd turned it off after the 5th call. "Sarah?" Eleanor's frail voice came through the open window. "Come inside, darling. You'll catch cold." "In a minute, Grandma." But Eleanor appeared in the window anyway, concern etched in every line of her weathered face. "I saw the article." Serafina's cheeks burned with humiliation. Her grandmother, the sweetest, most dignified woman she'd ever known, had seen those horrible lies, those invasive photographs. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen." "Sorry for what? Falling in love?" The simple question broke something open in Serafina's chest. Sorry for being stupid enough to think it could work. Sorry for embarrassing you. Sorry for believing in fairy tales. Eleanor climbed carefully onto the fire escape, settling beside her granddaughter with a gentleness born of decades of offering comfort. Tell me about him. The real him, not what those vultures wrote. So Serafina did. She told her grandmother about Adrian's vulnerability after nightmares, about the way his eyes softened when he spoke of Daniel, about how he'd defended her against Rachel's cruelty. She told her about the star necklace and white roses, about promises to rewrite rules and the kiss that had changed everything. He sounds like a man worth fighting for, Eleanor said when she finished. The fighting isn't the problem, Grandma. It's the losing that scares me. Serafina touched the necklace she still wore, unable to bring herself to remove it. Men like Adrian Blackthorne don't choose women like me. Not when it costs them something. And what exactly has it cost him? His reputation, his privacy, his... Sarah. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. Has he called you? My phone's been off. Turn it on. With reluctant fingers, Serafina powered up her phone. Immediately, notification after notification flooded the screen. Voicemails, texts, missed calls, dozens of them. But it was the most recent text that made her breath catch. I don't care what they write about us. I don't care what it costs. Come home, Serafina. Let me fight for you. Let me prove that some fairy tales are worth believing in. Adrian. Oh, she whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Eleanor smiled, the expression transforming her tired features. That doesn't sound like a man ready to give up, does it? Before Serafina could answer, a black town car pulled up to the building below. Through the windshield, she could see a familiar figure stepping out, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with determined purpose. Adrian. He'd found her. What are you going to do? Eleanor asked softly. Serafina watched as Adrian approached the building entrance, saw him pause to look up at the fire escape as if he could sense her presence. Even from 3 stories up, she could feel the intensity of his gaze, the desperate hope in his posture. I don't know, she admitted. I'm terrified. Good, Eleanor said, patting her hand. The best things in life should terrify you a little. It means they matter. Below them, Adrian had reached the building door. In moments, he'd be climbing those stairs, demanding answers, offering promises that might be impossible to keep. Serafina touched the star at her throat one more time and made her choice. The knock on the apartment door came exactly 3 minutes after Adrian disappeared from view below. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs as Eleanor squeezed her hand. Answer it, darling. Some conversations can't be avoided forever. When Serafina opened the door, Adrian stood in the narrow hallway looking like he'd run up 3 flights of stairs, which he probably had. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie askew, and there was something wild and desperate in his blue eyes. Don't, he said before she could speak. Don't you dare apologize or tell me this was a mistake. Adrian, I love you. The words exploded from him like they'd been trapped too long. I'm in love with you, Serafina Winters, and I don't give a damn what the newspapers say, or what Rachel thinks, or what anybody else believes about us. The simple declaration hit her like lightning. You love me? Desperately. Completely. So much it terrifies me. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. I love the way you hum when you cook. I love how you see past all my armor to the man underneath. I love that you stayed when everyone else ran. I love that you care enough about me to try to protect me, even when it breaks your heart. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Adrian, you don't understand what this will cost you. What will it cost me? He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs gently wiping away her tears. My reputation? I built it once. I can build it again. Business deals? There will be others. Money? I have more than I'll ever need. His voice turned fierce. But you, Serafina, losing you would cost me everything that matters. People will never accept us. We're from different worlds. Then we'll create our own world. He pressed his forehead to hers. I meant what I said before. It's time we rewrote the rules. From inside the apartment came a gentle clearing of throat. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, leaning on her walking cane, but with eyes bright with interest. Grandma, this is Adrian Blackthorne, Eleanor finished, extending her hand with regal dignity. I've heard quite a lot about you, young man. Adrian took her hand carefully, his expression shifting to something softer. Mrs. Winters, I'm honored to meet you. Are you? Eleanor studied him with the sharp eyes of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize truth from pretense. Even though loving my granddaughter will make your life considerably more complicated. Especially because of that, Adrian replied without hesitation. The best things in life should complicate everything. They should matter enough to fight for. Eleanor's smile was radiant. I like him, Sarah. Grandma. In fact, Eleanor continued, I think you should invite him in for tea. This hallway conversation is giving Mrs. Patterson next door far too much entertainment. As if summoned, a door cracked open down the hall, revealing a pair of curious eyes before quickly shutting again. Despite everything, Serafina found herself laughing. Come in, before we become the building's evening entertainment. The small apartment felt even tinier with Adrian's presence filling it. He looked around the humble space, the worn furniture, the carefully mended curtains, the photographs chronicling a life built on love rather than luxury, and something in his expression softened further. It's perfect, he said quietly, and Serafina knew he meant it. Eleanor busied herself making tea while Adrian and Serafina sat on the small couch, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. I fired my entire PR team, Adrian said suddenly. What? This afternoon. Before I came here. They wanted to issue a statement distancing myself from you, controlling the narrative by throwing you under the bus. His jaw tightened. I told them exactly where they could put their strategy. Adrian, you can't destroy your business for me. I'm not destroying anything. I'm rebuilding it on something real for once. He turned to face her fully. I've spent 3 years letting grief and guilt control every decision. But you make me want to live again, not just survive. Eleanor returned with tea, settling into her favorite chair with the satisfaction of someone about to watch a good show. So what happens now? Serafina asked, accepting the warm cup gratefully. Now I prove that what we have is worth more than what they can take away. Adrian's voice carried absolute conviction. I'm calling a press conference tomorrow. I'm going to tell the world exactly what you mean to me. Adrian, no. That will just make things worse. Will it? Or will it take away their power to hurt us? He set down his tea and took her hands. Rachel's weapon was shame, Serafina. She counted on us being ashamed of what we feel. But I'm not ashamed. I'm proud. I'm proud that someone as extraordinary as you chose to love someone as damaged as me. You're not damaged, Serafina protested. You're healing. We both are. Then let's heal together. Publicly. Unapologetically. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Serafina's breath caught. I know this is fast, Adrian said, his hands trembling slightly. I know it's crazy and impractical and probably terrible timing, but I've learned that life is short and love is rare, and when you find something real, you don't let it go because other people don't understand it. He opened the box to reveal not the massive diamond she might have expected, but a simple solitaire that caught the apartment's modest lighting and threw it back like captured starlight. Serafina Winters, he said, dropping to one knee in the tiny living room while Eleanor clasped her hands together in delight. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that fairy tales can come true even for broken people like us? The question hung in the air like a prayer. Serafina looked at this man who'd found her in his darkest moment, who'd chosen love over fear, who was willing to face the world's judgment for the chance to build something beautiful together. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Adrian. Yes to all of it. The ring slid onto her finger like it had always belonged there. Adrian rose and kissed her with desperate joy, while Eleanor applauded from her chair. Now that's settled, Eleanor said briskly. Let's talk about this press conference. Because if you're going to rewrite the rules, darling, you'd better make sure you write them beautifully. Outside, the city sparkled with endless possibility. Inside the small apartment, 3 people sat planning a revolution disguised as a love story. And for the first time in 3 years, Adrian Blackthorne believed in happy endings again. 6 months later, the wedding was small, intimate, perfect. Held in the mansion's garden under a canopy of white roses, it was attended by the people who truly mattered. Eleanor, radiant in lilac silk. Margaret, openly weeping with joy. And a carefully selected group of friends who'd proven their loyalty during the media storm. Rachel's attempts to destroy them had ultimately backfired. Adrian's press conference, where he'd spoken eloquently about love, loss, and second chances, had transformed public opinion. Their story became one of hope rather than scandal. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Serafina looked up at her husband, and smiled. "Any regrets about rewriting the rules?" she asked. Adrian spun her gently, his eyes full of the kind of joy she'd never thought possible. "Only one," he said, pulling her closer. "I should have done it sooner." Above them, stars sparkled in the Manhattan sky, bearing witness to a love story that proved sometimes, if you're brave enough to fight for it, fairy tales really do come true. At the Kentur.